Up in the Andes, where the air gets thinner and the nights turn brutally cold, farming has never been easy. The land looks beautiful from a distance, but for anyone trying to grow food there, it can feel like a constant gamble. One clear day can suddenly turn into a freezing night, and that drop in temperature is enough to wipe out entire fields of crops before sunrise. For communities that depended on what they grew, that kind of loss wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Yet somehow, long before modern tools or scientific instruments existed, people in this region figured out a way to deal with it. Not just survive it, but work with it. Instead of fighting the cold directly, they designed a system that quietly reshaped the environment around their crops. That system became known as Waru Waru. At first glance, Waru Waru doesn't look like a dramatic invention. There are no towering structures or complicated machinery. What stands out instead is a pattern in the land itself. Long, raised strips of soil run across the landscape, and between them sit narrow canals filled with water. It looks simple enough that it's easy to underestimate. But the moment the temperature begins to drop, that simplicity reveals something remarkable. During the day, under the strong Andean sun, the water in those canals absorbs heat. It sits there quietly, collecting warmth without drawing attention. As evening approaches and the air begins to cool, that stored heat doesn't just disappear. The water releases it slowly, almost like a natural heater built into the allard itself. That warmth rises just enough to protect the crops growing on the raised beds beside it. Instead of freezing, the plants sit in a slightly warmer pocket of air. It's not dramatic, it's not obvious, but it's just enough to prevent frost from settling in and destroying everything. In a place where a few degrees can mean the difference between survival and failure, that small shift changes everything. This wasn't an accidental discovery. It reflects a deep understanding of how the environment behaves. The people who developed Waru Waru weren't just planting crops. They were observing patterns. They noticed how water and temperature interacted. They saw how land could be shaped to influence those interactions. And then they turned those observations into something practical. The raised beds themselves play an important role too. By lifting the crops above the surrounding ground level, they avoid waterlogging during periods of heavy rain. The Andes can bring sudden downpours, and flat fields often struggle to drain properly. Waru Waru sidesteps that problem entirely. The canals collect excess water, keeping the roots from drowning while also storing resources that will be useful later. Over time, those canals become more than just water storage. Organic matter builds up inside them. Plants, sediments, and nutrients gather and settle. That mixture enriches the soil when it's cycled back onto the raised beds. So while the system protects against frost, it also quietly boosts fertility. It's doing multiple jobs at once without needing any external input. And then there's the ecosystem it creates. The canals aren't empty. They support life, small aquatic plants, microorganisms, sometimes even fish. All of that contributes to a balanced environment. Instead of a single-purpose field, Waru Waru becomes something more dynamic, almost like a living system where each part supports the others. Crops like potatoes and quinoa, which are well suited to the Andes, thrive in this setup. These are staples that communities rely on, and Waru Waru gives them a better chance of reaching harvest without being wiped out by a sudden frost. It doesn't guarantee perfection, but it dramatically reduces risk. And in a harsh environment, reducing risk is everything. What stands out even more is how sustainable the entire system is. There's no need for fuel, no need for imported materials, no dependency on complex infrastructure. Everything comes from the land itself. Soil, water, sunlight, those are the only ingredients. And yet the result is a system that can last for generations. This approach reflects a way of thinking that feels very different from modern industrial agriculture. Instead of forcing the land to behave in a certain way, Waru Waru works alongside natural processes. It guides them, shapes them, and benefits from them without exhausting them. That balance is part of why the system endured for so long. Communities didn't just build a few of these beds and stop. Entire landscapes were shaped using this method. From above, the land would have looked like a carefully organized network of raised platforms and canals stretching across large areas. It wasn't random. It was planned, intentional, and deeply connected to how people lived. Farming in that environment required cooperation. Maintaining the canals, managing the water, and tending the fields wasn't something done in isolation. It involved shared effort. And because the system benefited everyone, it reinforced a sense of collective responsibility. The success of one field often depended on how well the surrounding system was maintained. There's also a kind of quiet resilience built into Waru Waru. Even when conditions become unpredictable, the system adapts. Too much rain? The canals handle it. Sudden cold? The stored heat provides protection. Nutrient depletion? The organic matter in the canals helps restore balance. It's not a rigid design. It's flexible, able to respond to changing conditions without collapsing. That adaptability is one of the reasons modern researchers have taken interest in Waru Waru again. In a time when climate patterns are becoming less predictable, solutions like this stand out. They don't rely on constant external inputs. They don't break down easily when conditions shift. Instead, they offer a model of how agriculture can remain stable even when the environment isn't. Looking closely, it becomes clear that Waru Waru isn't just about farming. It's about understanding relationships between water and temperature, soil and nutrients, people and land. Each element plays a role, and the system only works because those roles are balanced. It's also a reminder that innovation doesn't always look like something new. Sometimes it's something that has existed for centuries, waiting to be understood again. The people who developed Waru Waru didn't have modern tools, but they had observation, patience, and a willingness to learn from the environment around them. And that learning didn't happen overnight. It likely took generations of trial and error. Small adjustments, gradual improvements, shared knowledge passed down over time. What exists now is the result of that long process, refined and shaped by experience. Even today, when looking at a Waru Waru field, there's a sense that the land itself has been carefully guided rather than dominated. The raised beds follow natural contours. The canals sit where water can move efficiently. Nothing feels forced. It feels integrated, like the system belongs there. As the night settles in and temperatures begin to drop, the real value of that design becomes clear. The water in the canals releases its stored warmth, and the crops remain just above the freezing threshold. While nearby fields might suffer damage, these raised beds continue to hold on. That quiet protection is what makes Waru Waru so powerful. It doesn't rely on dramatic intervention. It works subtly, consistently, and effectively. And for the people who depended on those crops, that consistency meant stability. Over time, this system became part of the cultural identity of the region. It wasn't just a technique, it was a way of life. Knowledge about how to build and maintain Waru Waru was shared within communities, becoming part of their collective understanding of the land. Even as other agricultural methods developed, Waru Waru remained relevant because it addressed a very specific challenge: extreme environmental conditions. And it did so in a way that didn't require constant adjustment or outside resources. In recent years, there has been a renewed interest in bringing this method back into wider use. Farmers and researchers have started to revisit these ancient techniques, recognizing their potential in modern contexts. Especially in areas facing climate instability, Waru Waru offers a proven approach that has already stood the test of time. The idea isn't to replace modern agriculture entirely, but to learn from systems like this, to understand how they work and adapt those principles where they make sense. Because sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones that have already been quietly working for centuries. And as attention turns back to these raised fields, there's a growing appreciation for the knowledge behind them. Not just as a historical curiosity, but as something practical and relevant today. The Andes remain a challenging place to farm. The cold hasn't gone anywhere. The frost still threatens crops. But the presence of Waru Waru shows that even in the harshest conditions, thoughtful design can create opportunity. It's a system built on observation, shaped by necessity, and sustained through generations. And even now, it continues to demonstrate how powerful simple ideas can be when they're deeply connected to the environment. As these raised fields continue to prove their value, something even more interesting began to stand out. The system didn't just protect crops from frost, it reshaped how the land itself behaved over time. Areas that once struggled with unpredictable conditions slowly became more stable, more productive, and more reliable. The canals played a huge role in that transformation. Water flowing through them wasn't just sitting still, it was interacting constantly with the soil. Tiny particles carried by water would settle, building layers of nutrient-rich sediment. Over time, that sediment could be lifted and spread back onto the raised beds, naturally replenishing the soil without the need for anything artificial. It created a cycle where the land was continuously being renewed instead of depleted. That's a big deal, especially in high-altitude regions where soil quality can be inconsistent. Instead of exhausting the land season after season, Waru Waru turned farming into something regenerative. Each cycle didn't just produce crops, it improved the conditions for the next one. And then there's the way water is managed. In many agricultural systems, too much water or too little water can both be a problem. Waru Waru balances that almost effortlessly. During periods of heavy rain, the canals act like a buffer, catching excess water and preventing the raised beds from becoming waterlogged. When conditions get drier, that same water becomes a reserve, slowly feeding moisture back into the surrounding soil. This kind of balance reduces the extremes. Crops aren't constantly stressed by sudden changes, and that stability leads to more consistent yields. It's not about maximizing output in a single season. It's about ensuring that every season has a strong chance of success. The biodiversity supported by the canals adds another layer to this system. Life in those water channels isn't just incidental. It contributes directly to the health of the fields. Microorganisms break down organic material, releasing nutrients. Aquatic plants can be used as additional compost. In some cases, small fish provide both ecological benefits and an extra food source. Everything is connected, nothing is wasted. It's a system where each part supports another, creating a network of interactions that strengthen the whole. There's also a subtle but important effect on temperature beyond just frost protection. Because water heats and cools more slowly than air, it helps smooth out temperature fluctuations overall. Days don't feel as intensely hot right above the beds, and nights don't feel as sharply cold. That moderation creates a more comfortable microclimate for crops to grow in. It's not something that would necessarily be obvious just by looking at the fields, but over time, those small differences add up. Plants grow more steadily, stress is reduced, and that consistency translates into healthier harvests. Looking at it from a modern perspective, it's hard not to see how advanced this understanding really was. Without formal scientific terminology, the people who developed Waru Waru were applying principles that align closely with what is now understood about thermal mass, water management, and ecosystem balance. They didn't need equations or instruments to validate their ideas. The results spoke for themselves, season after season. What's even more impressive is how scalable the system was. It could be adapted to different sizes, from small community plots to large agricultural areas. The core idea remained the same, raised beds and surrounding canals, but the layout could shift depending on the landscape. That flexibility made it easier for different communities to adopt and maintain. It wasn't a rigid blueprint that had to be followed exactly. It was more like a set of guiding principles that could be adjusted to fit local conditions. Over time, as societies changed and new methods were introduced, some of these fields fell out of use. Parts of the system were abandoned, and in certain areas, the knowledge began to fade. But it never disappeared completely. In recent decades, there has been a growing effort to rediscover and restore Waru Waru. Farmers, researchers, and communities have started rebuilding these raised fields, often using a combination of traditional knowledge and modern insights. And the results have been encouraging. Fields that were once unproductive have started to yield crops again. Areas that struggled with frost damage have seen improvements. It's not just a historical experiment, it's a practical solution being applied in real time. One of the reasons for this renewed interest is the increasing challenge of climate variability. Weather patterns are becoming less predictable in many parts of the world. Sudden temperature drops, irregular rainfall, and shifting seasons are making agriculture more difficult. In that context, systems like Waru Waru offer something valuable: resilience. Instead of relying on constant intervention, they build stability directly into the landscape. They reduce vulnerability to extremes rather than trying to control them completely. And that approach is becoming more relevant with each passing year. There's also something important about the way knowledge is being shared again. Reviving Waru Waru isn't just about rebuilding the physical structures. It's about reconnecting with the understanding behind them. Communities are once again learning how to read the land, how to observe patterns, and how to work with those patterns instead of against them. That process brings a sense of continuity. It connects the present with the past in a way that feels practical rather than symbolic. The same principles that helped people farm centuries ago are being used again, not because they're old, but because they still work. And when looking at the bigger picture, Waru Waru becomes more than just an agricultural technique. It becomes an example of how innovation can come from careful observation and long-term thinking. It shows that solutions don't always need to be complex to be effective. In fact, some of the most powerful ideas are the ones that integrate seamlessly into their environment. They don't stand out as artificial or imposed. They feel like a natural extension of the landscape itself. That's exactly what Waru Waru achieves. It transforms challenging terrain into productive land without stripping away its natural characteristics. It enhances what's already there instead of replacing it. And perhaps that's why it continues to capture attention today. In a world where many systems are pushed to their limits, there's something compelling about an approach that prioritizes balance, adaptability, and sustainability. The raised beds, the canals, the slow release of heat during cold nights, each part plays a role in a larger story about how people have learned to live with their environment rather than struggle against it. It's a story of patience, observation, and practical creativity. A reminder that even in the face of harsh conditions, solutions can emerge that are both simple and remarkably effective. As the Andes continue to challenge those who farm there, Waru Waru stands as proof that those challenges can be met, not with force, but with understanding. And that understanding, built over generations, still has something to offer today. If this kind of ancient innovation and clever engineering sparks curiosity, there's plenty more to explore. Stories like this reveal how much knowledge is still out there, waiting to be rediscovered and appreciated. So go ahead and like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more fascinating insights into the world's most ingenious ideas.